He was a titan of the music industry, a symbol of success, and a household name. Sean Diddy Combs built an empire that spanned music, fashion, and media. But behind the glitz and glamour, a darker story was unfolding, one that would eventually lead to his dramatic downfall. In May 2025, the world watched as Diddy stood trial in a New York federal court, facing serious charges including sex trafficking, racketeering, and transporting individuals for prostitution. The allegations were shocking, involving claims of drugging, coercion, and abuse. Central to the case was Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former girlfriend. Pregnant and resolute, she testified about years of alleged abuse, detailing instances of physical, sexual, and psychological torment. She spoke of freak-offs, drug-fueled parties where she claimed she was coerced into participating against her will. The defense presented messages suggesting consensual participation, but Cassie maintained that fear and manipulation were at play. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives, each side painting a different picture of their tumultuous relationship. Denied bail multiple times due to concerns about witness tampering, Diddy remained in custody as the trial progressed. The prosecution portrayed him as the leader of a criminal enterprise, alleging that he used his influence and resources to exploit and control his victims. The revelations sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Brands distanced themselves, partnerships dissolved, and documentaries delving into the allegations were announced. The public grappled with the stark contrast between Diddy's public persona and the disturbing accusations. As the trial continues, the world watches closely. The outcome will not only determine Diddy's fate, but also send a powerful message about accountability and justice in the entertainment world. The image of Diddy as a suave businessman, an industry pioneer, began to unravel the moment Cassie filed her civil lawsuit in late 2023. It was a 35-page complaint that laid out disturbing claims. Cassie alleged that for more than a decade, Diddy subjected her to beatings, coercion, and forced sexual encounters with male sex workers while he watched. She said she was trapped in a life she could not leave, one controlled by drugs, fear, and manipulation. Almost immediately after the lawsuit was filed, it was settled out of court, raising eyebrows. Some saw it as a strategic move, others as a quiet admission of guilt. But that was just the beginning. What followed in the coming months was a wave of lawsuits, some anonymous, some not, all telling eerily similar stories. Women, and some men, came forward describing a pattern of behavior that spanned decades: drugging, surveillance, assault, intimidation. There were stories of people being lured into Diddy's orbit, only to find themselves isolated and abused. And then came the federal investigation. In March 2024, Homeland Security agents raided Diddy's homes in Los Angeles and Miami. Helicopters circled overhead. Armed officers stormed into his residences. It was a dramatic moment, the kind usually reserved for fugitives or drug lords. The footage of agents removing electronics, hard drives, and boxes of documents became a viral sensation. But it wasn't just theater. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The charges that followed weren't simple. They painted a picture of Diddy as the head of a sprawling criminal operation, one that allegedly involved trafficking, threats, and payoffs to silence victims. Prosecutors alleged that Diddy used his wealth and power not just to enjoy luxury, but to control people, to turn them into puppets, playing roles in his twisted fantasies. At the center of many accusations was a practice referred to repeatedly as freak-offs. These were reportedly sex parties, heavily drug-fueled, and sometimes involving strangers brought in from across the country. In some cases, the victims alleged they were drugged without their knowledge. Some claimed they were recorded without consent. Others said they were too afraid to leave or even speak out because of the threats made against them or their families. Cassie's testimony in court was haunting. She detailed the moment she realized she was no longer just a girlfriend, but a prisoner. She described being forced to participate in acts that left her ashamed and broken. According to her, any sign of resistance would be met with violence. One incident she described involved Diddy allegedly stomping on her face after a disagreement. She needed medical care, which he reportedly arranged to keep private. She was told to stay silent, and she did, for years. But the pattern didn't stop with Cassie. Other women, including people who had worked for Combs or been romantically linked to him, said they witnessed the same behavior. Some described being threatened by his security team. Others claimed they were bribed to stay quiet. A few said they were scared for their lives. As investigators dug deeper, a troubling pattern emerged. It wasn't just about sex or abuse. It was about control. Surveillance footage from Diddy's homes revealed rooms with hidden cameras. There were rumors of a private server where videos were stored. Videos that prosecutors said might contain illegal acts. One anonymous former employee told federal agents that Diddy kept detailed records of his parties and interactions, not for nostalgia, but as leverage. Behind the celebrity mask, they said, was a man obsessed with control and dominance, a man who believed he was untouchable. As the court proceedings moved forward, Diddy's legal team went into damage control. They denied everything. They pointed to inconsistencies in the testimonies. They claimed that the relationships were consensual, that any payments made were settlements, not admissions. They painted the women as opportunists, chasing clout or compensation. But the stories kept coming. Some of the most disturbing details came from a former male employee who alleged he was drugged and assaulted after refusing to participate in a party with Combs and others. He said he woke up disoriented, bruised, and terrified. He tried to quit his job the next day, but was allegedly offered hush money instead. In total, over a dozen civil lawsuits piled up within a year. By 2025, the federal government had enough to indict. The charges read like something out of a mob case: racketeering, sex trafficking, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. Prosecutors claimed that Combs didn't just commit these acts, he led a network that enabled and protected him. His inner circle was under scrutiny. Former bodyguards, assistants, even drivers were called in for questioning. Then came the leaks. Audio recordings, text messages, even video clips began surfacing online. Some appeared to show Diddy berating or threatening staff. Others showed what appeared to be private parties with questionable behavior. His defense team tried to block the materials, calling them illegally obtained or edited. But the damage was done. Public opinion was shifting fast. Media outlets that once celebrated his rise now chronicled his fall. Brands severed ties. His liquor deals were suspended. His name was removed from projects. Even his alma mater, Howard University, began distancing itself from him. And through it all, Diddy remained mostly silent. His team issued short statements, insisting on his innocence, blaming a culture of trial by media. But he didn't sit for interviews. He didn't issue apologies. He didn't explain. What many found particularly chilling was how long it took for the world to notice. These weren't new allegations. Some dated back to the early 2000s. Whispers had existed for years. But Diddy was powerful, untouchable. People were afraid to come forward. And those who did were often ignored or silenced. The trial itself became a spectacle. Every day, reporters lined up outside the courthouse. Every witness became a trending topic. Inside the courtroom, jurors listened as the government laid out its case, a methodical, years-long pattern of abuse, silencing, and control. The defense argued back with equal fervor, portraying Diddy as a victim of opportunism and lies. But the evidence mounted, and the testimonies, while sometimes painful, were consistent, too consistent to ignore. The court heard from a former executive assistant a woman who had worked closely with Diddy for over 5 years. She described the environment inside his home as claustrophobic and paranoid. She testified that Diddy didn't just want control over his romantic partners, he wanted control over everyone. Employees were allegedly monitored through cameras, conversations were recorded, and phones were randomly confiscated and checked. According to her, Diddy trusted no one and feared betrayal from within his own circle. She recounted an incident where she said she saw a young woman leave one of Diddy's private parties in tears. When she tried to check on the woman, a bodyguard reportedly warned her to stay out of it. That moment, she said, changed everything for her. She began documenting what she witnessed: schedules, photos, messages. Eventually, she turned those materials over to federal investigators. The more people spoke, the more Diddy's empire seemed to unravel. His team argued that disgruntled employees and bitter exes were working together to take him down. But the stories were disturbingly similar. The timeline of events was tight, and the FBI had quietly been building a case for over a year before the first raid. There was also the matter of the money. Diddy had long been considered one of hip-hop's wealthiest moguls, but prosecutors alleged that some of that wealth had been used to silence victims: hush payments, luxury gifts, lavish vacations. According to the prosecution, it wasn't generosity, it was leverage. One former artist under Diddy's label testified anonymously. He said that when he wanted to leave Bad Boy Records in the mid-2000s, he was pulled into a meeting at Diddy's mansion. What started as a business conversation quickly turned dark. He claimed he was drugged that night and that something happened to him, something he still can't talk about in detail. When he threatened to go public, he received a settlement offer. He took it, and he stayed quiet for nearly 20 years. It wasn't just about sex or parties. The case painted a portrait of systematic abuse: mental, emotional, and physical. It was about manipulation, about stripping people of their autonomy and using fear to keep them in line. This wasn't a man losing control. This was a man who prosecutors argued always knew exactly what he was doing. The prosecution brought in a digital forensics expert to testify about the devices seized during the raids. They found encrypted drives, hidden folders, deleted files. Some of it had been wiped, but not thoroughly. What was recovered included hours of footage from security cameras, some of which appeared to show illegal activity. The expert said there were gaps in the footage, suggesting tampering. Still, what remained was damning. One clip reportedly showed an unconscious woman being carried out of a room by 2 men. Another showed Diddy berating a man in his living room, shouting threats and mentioning a list of people he needed to deal with. Prosecutors said this video showed not just rage, but intent. Diddy's legal team tried to dismiss the footage as out of context, claiming it didn't show what prosecutors said it did. They accused the government of sensationalizing events to sway public opinion. But even the judge remarked that the contents of the video were deeply concerning. As the weeks turned into months, more witnesses came forward. Some had nothing to gain. No lawsuits, no book deals. Just stories that had been buried for years. One woman said she had been a model in the early 2000s and met Diddy through a mutual friend. She claimed she was invited to an exclusive party, only to be drugged and assaulted. She never told anyone. But when she saw the raids on TV, she decided it was time. The media frenzy around the case only intensified. News networks dissected every testimony. Social media was ablaze with debates, conspiracy theories, and leaked documents. Celebrities who once praised Diddy fell silent. Some quietly deleted old photos. A few spoke out cautiously, saying they were shocked and heartbroken. The trial wasn't just about what Diddy did or didn't do. It became a mirror reflecting the culture of silence that often surrounds powerful men. How many people had looked the other way? How many knew but said nothing? In a particularly emotional moment, Cassie returned to the stand for cross-examination. The defense tried to discredit her, bringing up past interviews, inconsistencies in her timeline, and even her past relationships. But she remained composed. She didn't flinch. When asked why she didn't leave sooner, she answered simply, "Because I was scared he'd kill me." That line echoed through the courtroom. And then there were the financial ties. Prosecutors showed evidence that Combs had invested in properties across the US and overseas, including several allegedly used to host these private parties. They presented flight logs, receipts, even text messages where staff discussed preparing properties for special guests. It was a well-oiled operation, they argued, not random, not chaotic, planned. The defense continued to push back. They brought in character witnesses, former employees who said Diddy was demanding but never abusive. They argued that he was a target because of his success, that the government wanted to make an example out of a black mogul who had too much power. But the jury wasn't just hearing stories. They were seeing images, reading texts, watching footage. It wasn't just about whether Diddy was guilty of one bad night. It was about whether he had spent decades crafting an empire built not just on music, but on fear. The public began to look at everything differently. Old interviews resurfaced. Clips where Diddy joked about controlling people, about parties, about settling scores. At the time, they were brushed off, part of his brand. But now, they looked like warnings. As the trial neared its conclusion, the courtroom became more intense with each passing day. The gallery was packed. Journalists, former friends, curious onlookers, and advocates for the survivors. The energy was electric but tense. Everyone knew this wasn't just a celebrity trial. It was a reckoning. In a powerful moment, a former bodyguard took the stand. Large, stoic, and initially resistant to testify, he ultimately opened up. He admitted to witnessing incidents where women were handled roughly and where people were dragged out of rooms when they passed out. When asked why he didn't intervene, his answer was chilling. "You didn't cross him, you just didn't." The implication was clear. Fear ruled everything. The bodyguard explained that those who disobeyed orders would be fired, blacklisted, or worse. Some were threatened with fabricated criminal charges or told their families would be taken care of, and not in a good way. That testimony solidified a core theme of the case. This was not just about sexual misconduct, it was about a system of intimidation that had been in place for years. And then came the wiretaps. According to federal investigators, they had received court-approved access to calls between Diddy and some of his associates. On one recording, played in court, he allegedly discussed how to clean up the mess after a particularly chaotic party. He spoke in code, but the implications were clear. There was panic. There was strategy. There was cover-up. In another tape, he warned someone to stay loyal and not do anything stupid. Prosecutors argued this was aimed at a key witness who had started cooperating with the FBI. That call, they claimed, bordered on witness intimidation. Outside the courtroom, Diddy's fanbase began to fracture. Some still defended him. Others, especially those who had once idolized him, felt betrayed. Petitions were launched to strip him of awards and remove his name from industry honors. Several artists distanced themselves from him publicly. It became clear that even if he beat the charges, the legacy he had built was crumbling in real time. As closing arguments approached, both sides made their final push. The prosecution painted a damning portrait, a man who used his fame and fortune to exploit the vulnerable, a manipulator who weaponized loyalty and secrecy. They argued that this was not about isolated incidents. It was a pattern, a blueprint. And now, after years of silence, the truth was finally catching up to him. The defense countered with everything they had. They insisted the case was built on lies and exaggerations. They claimed witnesses were incentivized to lie, painting themselves as victims for money or fame. They reminded the jury that Diddy had not yet been convicted of any crime, that rumors and headlines were not evidence. But the jury wasn't just relying on rumors. They had photos, videos, audio. They had heard from people who had nothing to gain, and they had heard from the survivors themselves, people whose voices had been silenced for too long. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict. The courtroom was silent as the four persons stood. The result? In this moment, we hold, because this is where fact and timeline now intersect with the real world. At the time of this writing, the case against Sean Diddy Combs continues to unfold. More lawsuits may follow. New evidence may surface, but what's certain is that the illusion of invincibility is gone. Whether in a court of law or in the court of public opinion, Diddy's image has taken a blow from which it may never recover. The once untouchable mogul is now under the same scrutiny that many powerful men have faced in the post-#MeToo era. This case has reminded the world of something important, that fame doesn't protect you forever. That money can't buy silence indefinitely, that eventually the truth finds a way. And for the survivors, the women and men who lived in the shadows of this empire, this wasn't just about bringing down a music titan. It was about being heard, about reclaiming power, about saying, finally, without fear, this happened. As more victims speak out and the justice system continues its work, the Diddy case serves as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can hide behind celebrity glamour. In the world of entertainment, perception is everything. But in a court of law, perception doesn't matter. Evidence does. And now the world watches, waiting to see if justice, real justice, will be served. Because in the end, this isn't just Diddy's story. It's the story of every person who ever felt too scared to speak, too powerless to fight back. And it's a story still being written.